right before the pandemic, in late 2019, Moderna had been in existence for nearly 10 years, and that was it was a time of uncertainty for Moderna and for what investors thought of it. About a year before that, they had had an IPO and sold their stock on the public markets for the first time, and the stock price a year later was still very much stuck in this range near the IPO price and actually a little bit below it. And so that reflected some degree of skepticism that this whole new way of making drugs, this messenger RNA technology, drugs and vaccines, skepticism that it was really going to pan out, because at that point, Moderna was still what they call a development stage company, and they didn't have any products on the market and no real definitive proof that using mRNA to make a drug or a vaccine was going to be effective. And so at that time, um, the company's plan was to kind of soldier on and continue to develop some of the vaccines that it already had in its R&D pipeline, and other products, and to introduce new ones into the pipeline. So that's really where Moderna stood going into the pandemic. They believed in their potential and the promise of mRNA, but the investment community didn't seem entirely convinced. In 2010, one of the co-founders was a stem cell scientist at Harvard named Derek Rossi. Derek Rossi did some research and experiments that showed that mRNA, this genetic material, could actually be a useful tool to sort of change the fate of cells. Once he did that, he saw the potential. Well, maybe there's some commercial potential and just medical potential for this mRNA, and so he started to sort of begin the process of starting a new company and looking for people to help him out. Those other people who also became the co-founders, they included Bob Langer, the MIT professor, who has a lot of experience with drug delivery technology and is just very influential in biotech circles. And so once he got Bob on board, that was a big help. And then there was another cardiovascular doctor and researcher at Harvard named Ken Chen, who got involved. And so they each brought a few different things. Derek Rossi brought that academic lab and molecular biology expertise to the table. Bob Langer had that drug delivery and also just being very well connected in biotech. Ken Chen had he was an MD, unlike the other two, and had this expertise in cardiovascular research. And then the fourth leg of the table, so to speak, and this is critical, is Flagship, this venture capital firm that's in Cambridge that got interested, and they're led by Nubar Fayon. So then you had that combination of the scientific expertise, the medical expertise, and the money. And so and the experience of actually starting companies and getting them off the ground, and all the mundane things that may go into that, like getting office space and lab space. It was a series of connections during the year 2010 that led to, by the end of the year, this new company called Moderna. They knew that introducing mRNA in a lipid nanoparticle into the body could have an immunogenic effect. And they started to see the potential for using it for vaccines, partly because of this issue with repeated dosing. So with a vaccine, you're only talking 1, 2, 3 doses. Of course, right now that's kind of an open question with the COVID vaccines. And so they began to think that might make more sense and might be more suitable for mRNA and this lipid nanoparticle coating. And around the same time, they got Merck's attention, the heads of research at Merck, because Merck was a long-time traditional vaccine powerhouse. But even Merck knew that they had tried to develop vaccines against certain diseases over the years, like RSV, and just didn't have success using quote, traditional vaccine technologies. And so I think Merck saw an opportunity to partner up with Moderna, invest in it, collaborate scientifically, because they saw, even though they didn't know for sure, they thought there was potential for mRNA to be a new and effective way to develop vaccines that could potentially address some of the diseases that older vaccine technologies couldn't. I think it was in around 2016 that Moderna received a significant grant from BARDA to come up with a Zika vaccine. And at the same time, they were in touch with the Vaccine Research Center at NIAID, um, to collaborate scientifically on things like, you know, the design of vaccines, picking the best antigen, um, but also for help with running clinical trials. And so NIH started to do some of the testing on Moderna's Zika vaccine. And so that was all that sort of just continued from that time period on, and did set the stage for 2020. Moderna spoke very confidently about mRNA and what they thought was its potential to turn into a COVID vaccine that would work. But but you could see moments where, where they were human. And so, during some of the critical data releases during 2020, when Stefan Bancel would get the news that, this it worked in this trial, he would break down in tears. And so clearly to me, you see that that's a sign that he wasn't 100% sure it was going to work. And you see others, the chief scientific officer of the company during 2020, and others at the company would have moments of just not being sure that they made the right decision about something, but they had to make it on very quick timetables because the clock was ticking as the virus spread. And so, the chief scientific officer at one point early on, woke up in the middle of the night wondering whether they picked the right genetic sequence to include in the vaccine that would make the spike protein of the virus once it got into the body and sort of set off what they hoped was the desired immune response. And so he had this fear, what if they picked the wrong sequence and didn't work? They'd have to go back to the drawing board. And then later in the year, the president of the company, was struggling with what was the right dose level to pick for the vaccine to bring into clinical testing. And they kind of had to balance it out between, wanting a higher dose to ensure efficacy of the vaccine or to maximize that possibility. But in doing so, if they were going to pick a higher dose, that they only had so much manufacturing capacity. So that would mean perhaps fewer doses once it was available. And so they had to wrestle with these questions as the year went on. I think those were some of the more interesting aspects of it, sort of that mix of confidence and maybe even a little bit of bravado at times, but yet seeing these moments of humanity where, they either had their doubts or they just weren't sure they made the right decision. I really tried to present various viewpoints on this, because there have been critics of what has happened. Anti-poverty groups like Oxfam and Public Citizen, which is a sort of a government watchdog, but also a watchdog of industry. And they have real concerns about the fact that a lot of government support, taxpayer money, went into helping to develop these COVID vaccines, not just from Moderna, but from others too, and scientific insight, like I mentioned with the NIH. By being helped by that government support, these companies, they did see their stock prices go up quite a bit throughout 2020. Even now they're kind of up and down, but mostly up. And that has had the effect of really boosting the wealth of the executives who have ownership stakes in the companies, and in some cases have also been selling shares all along the way. And really, for tens of millions of dollars, and then they're still owning stakes that are worth in the billions. So I think there's some discomfort in that among critics like that. Now, on the other side, there are people who are very much defenders of what has happened, and they see this as a, I guess maybe either depending on how you want to look at it, as a byproduct or even as a just reward for an ecosystem that really supports a vibrant biotech sector in this country. Who say that the way to get the best innovation is to really attract investors who are willing to invest a lot of money in the hopes of big returns down the line, because these ideas that start out as someone in a lab 10 years ago could turn into something like hundreds of millions of doses being injected into people's arms to control the pandemic. And so they feel that the people who did put in all that work in the years leading up to the pandemic to sort of get the science to a certain point and to get other aspects like manufacturing infrastructure to a certain point, that they do deserve to be rewarded, and that they don't necessarily control the stock price. And so if they have a certain stake in a company and it goes up because the market sees that this company looks like it might contribute a lot to ending a pandemic, or at least getting it under control, and in the process raking in a lot of sales and profits, that's sort of the way it has to be. And so I try to present both of those viewpoints in the book, and I wouldn't say that I come to a strong conclusion. I'd rather just sort of put that out there for people to think about.